I would need to include seam allowance here in my measurement. But we don't have any of that. We don't have hem allowance here because we're just using that marrow machine finish, so we don't have to account for seam allowance. But there is the calculations in the book. It lists the formula of how you do it, and it says measure what you need, subtract an inch, add whatever amount that you need for however many seams. So if you had one seam in here and you're using half-inch seam allowance, you need half-inch on one side and half-inch on the other, and you'd have to add an inch. If you have two side seams, you'd have to add 2 inches, that kind of thing. So keep in mind if you want to do any seaming. We don't, so we're skipping that part of the formula on here. Okay? So I've got my goal measurement is 28 1/4, and the chart here, there's different columns. So there's a column if you're doing a quarter circle, so a fourth of this pattern, this kind of little wedge, or a half circle, which would be half of a circle, obviously. We're going to be making a full circle. So we're going to look at the last column on this chart to find our radius measurement. The first column is the length. That's really the circumference that we're after. And so we're going to go down, and these are all whole numbers. So I've got 28 1/4. So I'm going to look at 28 here and know that if I need to round a little bit, I'm going to be rounding up to accomplish that 1/4 inch. So they just go in whole numbers, so my choices are 28 or 29. I'm going to go with whichever one is close. If it were 28 1/2, I would find the radius measurement for both of them and go halfway in between. Okay? So this chart, this says for 28 inches, my radius needs to be 4 1/2. But there's a little minus sign symbol next to it. I don't know why they did this. It's sort of strange to me. But there's a little kind of key over on the side of the chart that says the minus and the plus symbols mean that you need to subtract a 1/16 of an inch if it says minus, or add a 1/16 of an inch if it says plus. I don't know why they just didn't put the 1/16 of an inch measurement there. Like, if they're going to put a plus or a minus, I don't know. So, yeah, so I need to round up anyway. I'm not going to minus my 1/16 of an inch because I need that extra little bit, so I'm not going to bother. And I'm going to go with 4 1/2 as my radius measurement. But if yours was exactly 28, you would do 4 1/2 minus a 1/16, then that would be your measurement. Okay, so I'm done with this guy. I've got my paper, and if you don't know how big your circle is going to be, cut it really big. I know how big our circle is going to be, so I gave you kind of a reasonable measurement for the size of your paper. You will need a square, so it needs to be the same size in both dimensions. I've gone ahead and I found kind of the middle horizontally and kind of the middle vertically. I usually like to fold it in half, give myself a little press, and then I find the row of numbers that's closest to that middle line. I have a couple inches on either side anyway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold along my lines. I find it's easier to draw the lines in before I fold it than draw my grain lines in after. Drawing on that little folded crease is hard, so. Plus, if I have a line to follow when I fold, my fold will be straighter. And then I'm going to fold it again. Fold it into fourths. And this corner, where the two lines were intersecting, this is going to represent the center of my circle. Okay? That will ultimately get cut away. Okay. So, they have a handy dandy little trick that they show in the book. If you don't have a gigantic compass that can handle a 4 1/2 inch radius, like I think my compass can handle maybe 3 inches, and it can give me a 6-inch circle, but this one isn't quite, it's not quite big enough. So what they have you do is take a tape measure, and at the 1-inch mark, because often the 0, there's a thing there, or it's stretched out, or it's missing, or whatever. At the 1-inch mark, poke a hole with an awl, or a screw punch, I guess, just big enough that a pencil tip can fit in there. Okay? So instead of being 1, you're going to have to think of that as kind of the 0 mark. And then you'll get a thumbtack, and whatever your radius measurement is, so 4.5 inches, 4.5 inches away from that hole, so in my case that'll be 5.5, I will put a push pin, and I will push pin that to the corner of my paper. Oh, wrong one. Thank you. Okay, push pin that to the corner of my paper, and get my pencil in the hole. And then this is sort of a nice makeshift compass, and I can make any size circle that I want. Okay, so I do need to do some additional circles. This is my seam line. I want to do, I now know I need to have seam allowance. I may as well mark that now, right? I need to know what my depth is of the circle, and I can use this same tool. So if I want 1/2 inch seam allowance, I could absolutely go and rotate, rotate, rotate with my ruler. Or I can just move my push pin to 5. Poke it in the same hole. And I've got 1/2 inch. So how wide is our flounce? I want to say it was 6.5, but let me double check. Yeah, it's 6.5. So I had 4.5 for this one, right? I need my flounce to be 6.5 from that seam line, so it's 4.5 plus 6.5. Yeah, 11, right? So on here it would be 12. Alternately, what you could do is you could, like before I knew about the ruler trick, I used to just tie string onto a thumbtack, and I'd tie string to my pencil. And what I would do is I would measure along here 6.5 inches from wherever I needed it. And I'd put a mark, and then I'd make sure my string was that long. So that's another way to do it. I think this, yeah, that'll take you to where you need to go. Okay, so then I will cut this out, or at this point I could mount this onto 2 layers of brown paper and cut once rather than cut twice. I think I'm going to cut this now just so you can see what we're going to do.
And Mrs. Cannon, that 6.5 inches doesn't have any seam allowance on the exterior.
It doesn't have hem allowance.
Yeah,
because we're not
got
hemming
that
it.
narrow,
Yeah, we're not doing a
thing.
yeah. We're not folding a hem. Okay, so when we open that up, we have a donut shape. And donuts. All of this. Okay, so one side of this, we'll just you pick a fold. We're going to cut a fold. Cut one of them. And to the left of that fold, that's going to represent, not center front, but that front edge. Okay. So we can kind of look at this and go, okay, this little quadrant is sort of the front. And this is sort of being the back waist. And this down here is kind of the cascade portion. So think of it kind of sewing around the skirt. So we need to now kind of curve out this corner. Because if this were cascading right now as is, I want to see if I can get this paper to cascade. Paper doesn't like to cascade. Okay, so that's sort of what the back side is doing.